Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you, so let's begin. My name is Logan, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that problems in a marriage don't just show up overnight. They are easy to ignore at first. And that's the mistake a lot of people make, including me. We tell ourselves, it's nothing, but those small things, if you don't pay attention to them, they grow into something much bigger. Felicia and I had been married for a few years, and in the beginning, things were fine. Not perfect, because no marriage is, but we had a good rhythm. If you had asked me back then, I would have told you we were solid. But looking back now, I realize that problems don't always start with a big explosion. Felicia's schedule started to change in ways that didn't make sense. She was coming home later than usual on Fridays. 1 or 2 times. Fine. But then it became a habit. When I asked, she always had a reason: extra work, a last-minute meeting, or some excuse about helping a friend with something. And if she didn't work late on Friday, then Saturday was the day she suddenly had somewhere to be. It could be brunch with a friend, a work errand, or some vague excuse about needing me time. At first, I accepted it. People get busy, right? But after a while, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Fridays and Saturdays. Those were the days she was always gone. And when she's at home, things don't get any better. The first red flag was her phone. It used to be something she left lying around without a second thought. If it buzzed while she was in another room, she'd call out and ask me to check who it was. But that changed. She was glued to her phone more than usual. And whenever I walked by, she'd tilt the screen away or lock it immediately. She never had a lock on her phone before, but one day I picked it up to check the time, and the screen demanded a passcode. I asked her about it, and she laughed it off, saying she had to be more security conscious. I let it go. These things alone might not seem like much, but when you put them together, they paint a very different picture. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I watched. And the more I did, the clearer it became. Something wasn't right. One night, Felicia stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her hair and touching up her makeup. She had told me she was meeting a friend, and I nodded like I always did. But deep down, I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to sit at home wondering. I needed to see things with my own eyes. She grabbed her purse, gave me a quick smile, and left. I waited exactly 5 minutes before grabbing my keys and heading out. My car stayed far enough behind hers so she wouldn't notice, but close enough that I wouldn't lose her. She wasn't heading toward the part of town where her friends lived. Instead, she took a different route, one that led to a stretch of businesses that had already closed for the night. I stayed calm and kept following. Felicia finally pulled into a nearly empty parking lot behind a strip of buildings. The only light came from a few dim street lamps, barely enough to see clearly. I turned into a spot a safe distance away, killing my headlights. She didn't get out of the car right away. Instead, she checked her phone. The glow from the screen lit up her face, and I watched as her fingers moved, typing something. A minute later, another car pulled up. A black sedan. It parked beside her, and before I could even process it, she opened her door and slid into the passenger seat of the other car. My stomach dropped. I had told myself over and over that I needed to stop jumping to conclusions. But what possible reason would she have to get into another man's car in a hidden parking lot at night? I took a deep breath. This was it. I had my answer. But I didn't move right away. I sat there, watching. If I had ever held onto any doubt before, it was gone now. She wasn't running errands. She wasn't with a friend. She was meeting someone in secret. After a few minutes, I opened my door and stepped out, moving with the kind of calm that didn't match the fire burning inside me. I walked across the lot, my footsteps steady, my heart pounding. When I reached the car, I raised my hand and knocked on the window. The reaction was instant. Felicia's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with shock. It was the kind of look someone gives when they know they've been caught and have no way out. Her mouth opened slightly like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. The man beside her, her coworker, looked just as panicked, his hands gripping the steering wheel like he was thinking of how to explain himself if things turned ugly. I let the silence hang between us for a moment before speaking. So this is what girls' night looks like. My voice was steady, not loud, not angry, just calm. Felicia stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Logan, this isn't. She didn't finish the sentence, because even she knew there was no way to spin this into anything innocent. I glanced at the man beside her. I knew him. He wasn't some stranger. He was someone from her office, a guy I had never once thought to be a threat. Married. Kids. Always talking about his family when I'd met him some months back. This is not the kind of man you would suspect, because he had too much to lose. And yet, here he was, sitting in a parked car with my wife, looking like he'd seen a ghost. I just exhaled slowly, let my eyes settle on Felicia, and said, "Meet me at home when you're done." Just that. Then I turned around and walked away. I could feel their eyes on my back as I headed toward my car, but I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had seen everything I needed to see. I drove home in silence, with my mind somewhere else, replaying what I had just seen. But as much as my gut screamed that she was cheating, I knew something that frustrated me even more. I didn't actually have solid proof. Think about it. I didn't take pictures. I didn't record anything. All I had was the sight of my wife in a car with another man in some dimly lit parking lot. If I confronted her further, what's stopping her from twisting the story? She'd probably say, "You're overreacting, Logan." And technically, she could get away with it because I didn't catch them kissing. I didn't hear them say anything inappropriate. It was my word against hers. That realization sat heavy in my chest. I wasn't stupid. I knew what I saw. But knowing something and proving it are two very different things. If I accused her right then, she could deny everything, turn it back on me, make me look like the paranoid husband. Hell, she might even cry and call me controlling, say I'm suffocating her, that I don't trust her. And the worst part? Without evidence, some people might actually believe her. I exhaled sharply, staring at the road ahead. This wasn't just about catching her in a lie. It was about making sure she couldn't weasel her way out of it. I needed her to admit it herself. I needed something undeniable. I was going to do something that would leave her no room to escape. When Felicia walked through the door, her face was already streaked with tears. She didn't even wait to take off her shoes before the begging started. Her voice cracked as she called my name, saying how sorry she was. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, watching her. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. Let her feel the weight of her own actions. She kept looking at me, waiting for me to react, waiting for me to yell or demand answers. When I didn't, she took a step closer, her sobs growing louder. "Logan, please," she whispered, her voice raw. "Say something." That's when I spoke. But I didn't ask her why she did it or asked her to explain herself. I just told her one thing: unlock your phone and give it to me. She froze with a little hesitation. That was all I needed to see. Because no matter what she had said or excuses she had prepared, nothing would mean more than what was on that phone. And she knew it. She sniffled, looking down at her phone. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't repeat myself. I didn't need to. I just squared my shoulders and gave her a look that told her this wasn't a request. It was an order. And she understood. With trembling fingers, she swiped across the screen, entered her passcode, and held the phone out to me. I took it without a word. I was ready for it. Because the moment she hesitated, I already knew the truth. Now I just needed the proof. I took her phone. She knew what was coming, and honestly, so did I. I went straight to her messages. At first glance, everything looked normal. But I wasn't stupid. I knew they wouldn't make it that easy to find. So, I scrolled deeper, checking individual conversations. And then I found it. A chat with a saved contact under an emoji. But as soon as I opened it, the truth was right there in black and white. I started reading the messages out loud. And with every word, Felicia broke down more. They had been careful. There were no obvious declarations of love, no explicit confessions, nothing that would make an outsider immediately assume an affair. If someone casually glanced at their messages, they would think it was just two co-workers chatting about work. But when you read between the lines, when you piece the conversations together, the truth became clear. There were messages about missing each other on weekends, about how hard it was to pretend around others. Then, the deeper I scrolled, the less they bothered to hide it. They spoke in code sometimes, but it wasn't hard to figure out. They reminisced about hotel meetups, planned work dinners that had nothing to do with work, and exchanged messages late at night, way past any reasonable work hours. The worst part? The way they talked about me. Messages about how she had to be careful, about how she hated lying but had no choice, about how they needed to be smarter, so no one would suspect. As I read their own words back to her, she sat there sobbing, knowing she couldn't talk her way out of this. The evidence was right in front of us both. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. I took a deep breath, staring at Felicia as she sat on the couch, her face buried in her hands. The room was quiet except for her muffled sobs. Finally I spoke. "Was I not enough for you?" I asked. Simple question. Straightforward. But Felicia didn't answer. She didn't even look at me. She just kept crying. I had given her everything, and in return, she had given me lies. I let the silence hang between us for a moment before I made my decision. There was no fixing this. No talking our way around it. The damage was done, and I wasn't going to spend another day in a marriage where I had to wonder if my wife was being faithful. I stood up, looked down at her, and gave her the only choice that made sense. "You're going to pack your things and leave," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "Or we go to court and everything comes out in the open. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly why this marriage ended." Her head snapped up then, her face wet with tears, her eyes wide with panic. "Please, Logan," she whispered. "Just give me time. Let's talk about this." I shook my head. No, there's nothing to talk about. Time wouldn't change the fact that she had betrayed me. Time wouldn't bring back the trust she had shattered. "I can't trust you anymore, Felicia. This marriage is over." She sobbed harder, but I didn't waver. I had made my decision, and I was sticking to it. The next day, she packed her things and left. No drawn-out fights. No second chances. Just a clean break. She walked out of the house we had built together. 2 weeks passed, and the divorce papers were finally ready. I remember holding them in my hands, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. I wanted this marriage to end, not because I enjoyed walking away from something we built, but because I knew I couldn't stay with someone who had already left me emotionally long before I caught her. Felicia must have sensed that I was serious because, before I could finalize everything, she tried one last time to talk me out of it. She showed up at my place. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. She was desperate. "Logan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we've been through so much together." She went on about our memories, about the good times, about how we had promised to always work through things. "We should fix this instead of throwing it all away," she pleaded. I just sat there and listened, not because I was considering it, but because I wanted to hear what excuse she could possibly come up with to justify what she had done. When she was done, I said, "You should have thought of that when you started giving another man your attention." After that, she didn't try to convince me anymore. Instead, she went out and started telling people that we broke up because we were not compatible. I almost laughed when I heard it. Not compatible? We were married for years, but now suddenly we weren't compatible? It was easier for her to say that than to admit the truth. But I didn't care. I had the truth, and that was enough for me. Looking back, I've learned a lot from this experience. And if there's one thing I want people to take away from my story, it's this: patterns matter. People don't just wake up one day and decide to cheat. It starts with small, consistent changes in their behavior. These little things, when ignored, turn into bigger problems. If someone is acting differently for no clear reason, it's worth paying attention to. Another lesson? Never ignore red flags. I monitored her behavior for months, and I already knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to believe it. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. But trust isn't about ignoring reality. It's about seeing things clearly and deciding whether someone deserves it. If you notice things that don't add up, ask questions. Pay attention. Trust your instincts. I wish I had taken action sooner instead of waiting until I had no choice but to face the truth. And most importantly, always have evidence before acting. If I had confronted Felicia at that parking lot and walked away with just my anger, she could have easily lied her way out of it. She could have twisted the story, denied everything, and made me look like a jealous husband who jumped to conclusions. But when I got hold of her phone, there was no room for debate. The messages spoke for themselves. Without proof, it's just one person's word against another's. And in a situation like this, people will say whatever they need to say to protect themselves. That brings me to another harsh truth. Some people will rewrite history to avoid looking bad. Even after everything, Felicia didn't tell people the truth about why our marriage ended. She didn't own up to her mistakes. Instead, she told people we just weren't compatible. That's how it goes. A lot of cheaters don't want to be seen as cheaters. They'll twist the story to make themselves look better. And honestly, I don't even care. Let her tell whatever version of the story makes her feel better about herself. The truth is the truth, whether she admits it or not. Now, some of you might wonder why I didn't go after revenge. Why didn't I expose her? Why didn't I ruin her reputation the way she ruined our marriage? The answer is simple. Revenge isn't necessary. I let her go, and that was enough. I wasn't going to waste my time trying to get even with someone who had already shown me who she was. At the end of the day, if she didn't want me, she should be with whoever she wants. I won't hold on to someone who doesn't value me. That's not losing. That's freeing myself from a lie. But that's just my perspective. I know everyone handles betrayal differently, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been in a situation like this? What would you have done differently? Drop a comment below, and let's talk about it. And if you made it this far, thanks for sticking with me. I appreciate you all, and I'll see you in the next one.